Next up, we'll be asking, what is BI Ops and why will we fail without it? BI Ops provides the guardrails that make enterprise-wide BI implementations successful. Within this episode, we will discuss the challenges associated with environments that have no BI Ops in place.
And joining me now to chat a bit more about what is BI Ops and why we will fail without it is Marius. Marius, thank you very much for joining us. BI Ops, it's a term that we're starting to hear a little bit more of at the moment, and you're making a very bold claim that we're going to fail without it. The first thing I'd like to touch on, though, is a bit of definition time. So what is BI Ops? How do you define it when you're having these conversations?
So I think fundamentally, and it's a pleasure to be here, by the way. And fundamentally, BI Ops is the set of processes and technologies that enable you to be successful with your BI deployments. And what I mean by success, we usually think about that sort of along three different dimensions. You want to have BI solutions that provide an experience that has sustained user engagement. Your users are coming back again over and over because it's very compelling. You want them to promote a high level of data literacy. So that means that when somebody is consuming content from their BI group, that they are understanding what that analytic means, how to interpret the data, et cetera. And then you want to generate thereby a high level of user satisfaction. So, we think of NPS scores in consumer space. The same thing applies here. These things should be things where your user community is telling you actively that these are indispensable to doing their work. And so BI Ops is all of the scaffolding around your BI solutions that enable that to take place.
And of course, the phrase is very, very closely related to DevOps, which is a term we've been using for a little while, coming out of the whole Agile methodology there. Just talk to me about how BI Ops, DevOps for data, how they all relate to one another when it comes to BI Ops.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if you think about DevOps in general, and you wouldn't, no one would ever dream of doing sort of large scale development these days without DevOps, right? Because it is the guardrails, if you like, that ensure success, and ensure that the right code gets deployed, that obsolete code gets removed, that if everything follows the correct process, and that everything's streamlined and automated to the extent that's possible. So, in BI though, if you look at how we deploy analytics today, we sort of have this mentality in most cases where it's like a fire and forget. Here's a visualization, analyst has built it, let's go create it, publish it, and then hope for the best, right? And over time, this creates a real problem because in fact, BI analytics, whether there's something that your data science team has built through machine learning or some kind of a dashboard with Tableau or Power BI or any tool that you're using, irrespective of what technology you're using, all of these technologies have an expiration date, right? You may not know what it is when you publish it, but in reality, at some point down the line, that analytic is no longer relevant because, the business has changed or the underlying data fabric has changed or just something has changed in the whole infrastructure, thereby rendering that obsolete. Maybe there's a new data source that's better than the current one that you've used for that analytic, et cetera. And so, if we don't have an infrastructure that makes sure that we are cleaning up and moving through the content, moving in the right place, then we'll fail.
Yeah, I am. And I want to come back to that point on stagnation in a few moments' time, because I think that's really interesting. So when you're pitching BI Ops, how do you articulate the benefits of it? How do you say this is why it's going to be a good thing to create this framework within your organization?
Yeah, so I think that, a simple analogy that I like to use is that of a supermarket. Say you're going to go and cook something today. Maybe you want to make some chili, and you're going to go buy some beans. You're going to go to the supermarket, and you're going to look, and that you're going to expect that when you pick up a can of beans off the shelf, that it's going to be, it's going to be good. And, you'll look and check and see, well, is there an expiration date? And perhaps if there's an expiration date on it, then, you'll put it aside and you'll go grab another can. Well, if you think about that same analogy and how users actually consume analytics in modern day BI infrastructures, it's as if they go and they grab a can of beans and it's expired. And then they go grab another can of beans and that one's expired too. And then the next one's expired, right? So it's almost as if the entire supermarket is littered full of content that is either obsolete or duplicative or things that are just not relevant to the user. And so somebody coming in to a new role within an organization, trying to figure out, what analytic should I be using to be able to make my decision there, because the environment is so littered with content that's expired, obsolete, duplicative, that we create a horrendous experience. In that supermarket analogy, you would never go back and tell your friends, hey, go shop at that supermarket. You'd say, oh, forget it. That's their stuff. They don't even bother to make sure that their food is good, right? All their stuff on the shelf is expired. And yet we expect as BI practitioners that our users will go and use analytics environments where they are littered with content that's not relevant for them. So really you justify BI ops and the need for just governance in general around your BI analytics by saying, if you expect your users to get engagement and to get utility out of the environment, you've got to create the right context, the right environment for them to be able to make sense of the information and use it. And if you don't, then it's hopeless. You're just really spending more and more time building analytics that nobody is going to be using.
All of this expired food, this reminds me very much of the convenience store just on the corner of my street. Maybe he could do with some BI ops to make sure that there's no expired tins of food on the shelves there. If he were, or if any other organizations watching did want to take those first steps there to make sure that they're able to, that their pieces of analytics are refreshed, that we don't have this stagnation that you speak of, what are the practical steps? What are the foundational parts that they need to have in place to go on a BI ops journey?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to the classic sort of three-pronged approach in that it's about people, process, and technology, right? So from a people's perspective, you need to really think about, who are going to be the folks that are responsible for BI ops, who are the folks that should be involved in governance. And typically in large organizations, if you've got, thousands or tens of thousands of people, that's not one small team. That's a group of people that take that responsibility in a distributed fashion within the organization. So you might have a center of excellence that defines general practices around certification, around content publishing, around content review and content deprecation. And then you're going to have these satellite groups that are close to the business, that are building the content out to the business, that will often do the execution. They'll be reviewing their content on a regular basis, making sure that it's relevant, adding tags for data literacy, going through the right process for certification and governance and so forth. So that's from the people perspective. From the process perspective, you need to really think about several different aspects of it. You want onboarding and certification of content. So what does it mean for content to be certified, for it to be trusted? Who's responsible for that? Are there different levels of certification? Sometimes you might have oftentimes we see, silver, gold, platinum, sort of different levels of certification, meaning different things. Maybe a platinum level certified content means that it's been vetted with a data governance team. It's using the blessed source of data that has alerts and checks on it. But whereas maybe a silver level certification is just the engineer that said, hey, yeah, this is good. I'm ready to use it. And so you've got to think about that and making sure that you've got an ability to onboard content, tag it, maintain it for literacy. And then the third pillar is all about technology. So, you've got to look at saying, well, what kind of technology are you going to bring to bear to make sure that the whole process of governance and BI ops, that is something that is lightweight enough so that people will actually do it. Because the Achilles heel of all of these governance and ops types initiatives is if you come up with a process that then your people cannot really use because they don't have the time to do it. So you must make sure that process is enabled through a set of tools that make it very easy for the people involved to go through and exercise the proper level of governance.
And it's the same with any transformation, any major change. You need to take people on the journey with you. And you mentioned the magic triangle: people, processes, and technology. I don't think it's a coincidence that people are often first on that triangle because they are the most important point on the triangle. The processes, absolutely. The technology's there to support whatever program you're going on there. And I think you put it very well. I want to come back to the point that you touched on right at the top, around stagnation, and that this seems to be one of the main benefits that you articulate around BI Ops. How do you maintain BI Ops over time? How do you make sure that the pieces of analytics, the processes don't become outdated, so you're not picking off any more of those stagnated cans from the shelf? Because it sounds like it's a lot of effort potentially to ensure the currency of the solutions that you're giving to the business.
Well, I think the way that you make it such that it's not a lot of effort is that you have the right sort of process that and then have the right level of automation around it. So I'll give you an example that we see often. Oftentimes there's this notion of certification, right? So the way you know that analytic is looking at, unlike the can of beans that has the expiration on it, right? When you look at particular visualization, the way you might know that it's good is because it's been certified. Because Joe, who is the analyst in this area, and Frank, who's the business owner of this area, both said that yes, this is the right analytic to use. If it's let's say it's a sales ops dashboard, it's using the right territory alignment and the right tables, and it's using the correct rules that the business has designated to be. This is how we measure compensation for the business, right? So that's all been said. Well, the problem is that if you just do that certification process as a one-off, when the content gets created, the analyst puts their stamp of approval, the business person puts their stamp of approval, and you stop, then you haven't really achieved the goal. 6 months, 9 months later, a year later, is that analytics still good, or should that business user be using something else? Who knows, right? So what you want to do is you want to have that analytic go into an environment where it automatically goes through a review process after a certain amount of time. So the clock starts ticking as soon as it's published, and then let's say 9 months or a year or 18 months, whatever's relevant based on that type of content, it's going to go through and automatically fall into an attestation process. And the analyst will get notified, the business user will get notified to say, hey, this visualization is due for attestation. They can just go in, take a look at it, and then say, yes, it's still good. I'm going to attest that it's still good. They have their accountabilities there, that it's going to be flagged right with that visualization. Anyone looking at it will say, not only was this certified 2 years ago, but 6 months ago, Joe attested that it's still good, right? So if you have that kind of process where things automatically get moved into an attestation process for verification, then anyone consuming the content can see in an auditable way that it's good. So that's one thing. The second thing that often we see people use is that they will also put in some automatic tripwires when things are changing behind the scenes. So, for example, if I've got my visualization and there have been significant changes that have been made to the warehouse, to a particular area, maybe that sales analytics, that data structure that we use has gone through changes, you can automatically flip the switch based on the lineage that you have for those visualizations and put all those visualizations into an attestation flow. And then based on that, now, you can re-verify that in fact that they're still good. So it can be either event-based when changes happen in underlying visualizations or data, or they can be triggered based on time intervals. But as long as the process is there and the notifications happen automatically from a systems perspective, it's not a difficult process. It's not time consuming. And it just takes a few moments to keep that going.
When we talk about DevOps and Agile, and we spoke a moment ago about how that relationship has fed into where you are with BI Ops now, you talk about some of the key benefits there. It's reducing time to value. It's getting away from this waterfall old school where it can be many months, years maybe from when the requirements were initially envisaged to the delivery, and the whole world could have changed since then. And it encourages these more regular feedback loops, this more regular iteration. And that, in a way, is very similar to what we're talking about here, is this revisiting solutions, making sure, are they still fit for purpose? Has anything changed in the universe that would adjust the output of that? Very similar, would you say?
Yeah, I think that is exactly right, and it's all about sort of putting together those structures that automate the change management, right? And in that sense, that's why we use the same terminology as DevOps, because DevOps is all about change management. But as change management in your application code, you need a slightly different model for change management around your BI analytics, but you still need to have something in place. And if you don't, it will, it's that, second law of thermodynamics, right? That all systems, irrespective, all closed systems, tend towards chaos, right? And the same thing will happen with your BI environment unless you have the mechanism to make sure that it is kept refreshed. And that and that you're making sure that for your users it's an experience where they come in and they're delighted by what you as the storekeeper have put in front of them, not sort of confused and disoriented, right? And that's the key.
Before we wrap up, Marius, are there any areas, any sectors or any case studies that you've come across or indeed partnered with where you've seen BI Ops have real success? Any shining examples of, well, it works particularly well in healthcare or finance or organizations where they make extensive use of analytics and so on? Where have you seen this be most successful?
I wouldn't say so much of I think we've seen it successful across all industries, so there's not so much a vertical focus, but I would say that the more complex your infrastructure is, the more, different BI tools you have, different teams building out content. This is often the case in many organizations, and we've seen organizations where they've had, 30, 40 different teams building out content throughout the organization. So the more complex that environment is, and also the longer you've had it in place, the more important it is and more urgent it is to put this in place. And I think when you think about this, I would encourage sort of the audience to think about it in sort of three different pieces, especially from a technology solution. You need to first and foremost bring all of your analytics together into a single place. So you need a portal or some solution thereof where there's a single surface where people access the content. You can't really think about governance if you have 30 different access points for content. You can't possibly govern it in all 30 in a coherent way. So having that is really important. So whether I'm somebody who's looking at spreadsheets that have been published for me, or Tableau dashboards, or a machine learning type of solution, it should all be kind of accessible in the same place. There should be a single mechanism for publishing that content to the portal that ensures that it goes through the right gates during publishing for certification and data literacy and tagging and all those things, so that all those assets share that common platform of success, of coherence and understanding coming into it. And then the third sort of pillar is that you need to have that reporting around engagement and around feedback and around things that give you the ability to understand, once you've published it, what content's successful, what content is not, what do we need to take off the shelf, what needs to be replaced, both from a perspective of what do people use explicitly, what's getting usage and what's not, and also more of a feedback mechanism needs to be in place where people can say directly, hey, this is something that's very useful for me, or, I would never recommend this to a colleague because it's just not, data's not that reliable. I don't find the organization very helpful, et cetera. And having that feedback loop go back to the content publisher. So in large organizations, that's a large group of people, but if you have the right infrastructure in place to facilitate all that, it can work in a way where that work is distributed out and it doesn't feel like a lot of work for any given single individual.
Does it feel like one of the main barriers there, particularly for the large analytics-rich organizations that you speak about that may benefit from here, is that consolidation? Maybe there are a lot of disparate analytics point solutions out there, but as you say, bringing them together into one place, surely that might feel like quite a big pill to swallow in order to enable some of the good stuff that we've been speaking about with BI Ops.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm not suggesting by any means that you boil the ocean and do it all at once. Mm-hmm. For large organizations, this process can take some time, but there's no reason why you can't do it incrementally. And you can identify sort of the highest value, highest impact areas. You've got these places where you're seeing either the most highest challenges with adoption or with data literacy or complaints from users around the fact that they're not no. And then you bring that onto the platform, and then you bring the next team on, and the idea is also this is, again, if you're thinking back to the beginning of our discussion, that sort of hub and spoke model where you don't have some team that's responsible for onboarding all the user content, but instead you really have like a center of excellence that's just setting up standards and saying, here's the managed environment. Here's how you do it. We've set up simple workflows. We've set up the portal. We've set up a way for content to automatically get synchronized in there. And now each of these business units, you can just go and bring your content in. And it's not, so that works really well because that distributes it out. So it's not as heavy of a lift. Each group within the organization can then come in and look at their content. What are our users using? What should we promote into the portal? Sure. Let's go follow this process and put it in place. And we found that to be quite manageable. And seeing large organizations, with tens of thousands of users and many thousands of pieces of content successfully onboard, over time, all their content, but certainly not all at once.
So don't try and boil the ocean, like you say. Look at those proof of concept, those proof of value. Start small, land and expand to find that value. Listen, Marius, I've found this conversation incredibly valuable. I'm sure everyone watching has as well. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Oh, it was a pleasure to be there. Thank you for having me.